We just need to start off. I'm a CCA Ontario. I have my 4R nutrient management, and I've been working with Alpine, the company, for as a customer and for probably over well over 35 years. The other thing is, being that I was working in research and development with a lot of biostimulants, I actually have been working with the K technology for 4 years with a non-disclose with Alpine before I came on board. So it's given me an opportunity to be able to relate and understand a lot of the products we have. So I'm going to start with a little beverage here, and then we're going to get going. So today what we're going to do is we're going to actually just talk about crop nutrition from a plant's perspective and how that actually works from the Alpine side of maximizing fertilizer efficiency. We are known as the starter fertilizer company, but we're growing way beyond that. And I think what you understand is that when you're designing fertilizer blends, not just blending fertilizer, understanding the role of the fertilizer in plants versus the fertilizer just for plants, and maximizing plant efficiency to enhance microbial efficiencies. So we're really going to look at how we can actually use nutrition to actually support soil health and even work towards soil regeneration and creating a better life into these soils as well. So working with Alpine, we have 2 plants, one in New Hamburg. It's 45 minutes from myself that I've been able to do business with most of my agricultural life. The second one is Belle Plains, which has been expanding quite rapidly, which feeds the West. And it's really neat to know that we hire Canadian people. We have the Canadian manufacturing facilities here to create quality product for growers across Canada. So one thing I wanted to look at is that we talk about Steve McQueen, and for those of you that are older, understand the Bullet movie. For those that probably are more accustomed to Lightning McQueen. But we look back and we think, how much horsepower did we actually create in those old cars? 390 cubic inch with 325 horse. And yet we still use oil, we use fuel. It's just that we've taken advanced technology to understand placement, how we, air to fuels and everything, all this technology. And how do we take that technology and actually incorporate it into a real strong agriculture and using our nutrition so they're actually way more efficient. We must always consider the balance and how we actually have balanced soil, because it's soil that actually feeds our plants. And as we fertilize soil in the proper way, that we can be able to grab the nutrition and utilize the nutrition into the plants. So we understand soil properties. And the big part about that is we have to look at the 3 aspects of that. So we use nutrition to grow best crops. That's the chemistry form that we're using. We correct soil structures, which is the physics of the soil, and we build the house for soil life and soil biology, which is the biology part. So back in school, when we actually took our chemistry, biology, and physics courses, we never realized that. Really, that is a key part to agriculture. When we break that down even deeper, we have to understand there's 4 basic needs for life, and we have to have air, water, and we have to have food and shelter. And the big key thing is we can't survive without air. That's number 1. And what actually holds air in your soils is the calcium. The percentage of calcium in your soil is what actually keeps the air to keep microbials alive. The second thing is water. And the magnesium is what really helps with the water. And it actually holds water in soils. And you know how tight soils are with mag compared to the ones that have low mag, which will be much looser. And we have to make sure we manage those, because it's actually the soil life that we're trying to keep in shape, so we have the microbials to do the workforce that we need. This is just an idea that if they test soils and even rocks, if you have iron, manganese, copper, and zinc in it, we know it was once alive. And this is just that we have to take care of our bacteria, our fungi, our protozoa. And even though a lot of us say, well, we're not livestock farmers, we actually truly are, because it's up to us to manage the life in our soils and manage it like we're feeding a livestock, so we can take care of them so they can in turn return benefits and profits to ourselves. The notion of soil is inseparable from the notion of the development of living organisms in it. Soil is created by microorganisms. Were this life dead or stopped, the former soil would become an object of geology. And we have to be careful that we don't take our soils and our land and just farm them to death so that actually they become as useless as rocks. And that's just what we're going to concentrate on, how we can actually have interactions between plants, nutrients, and roots to make that happen. We look at what matters most, as farmers, We need to know how to quickly treat a problem when we have those. But if it's all we do is treat problems and never solve them, they just reoccur. So it's how do we treat that problem to get through it, but what is the solution that we can do to actually make that go away? And if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. So we want to make sure that we're actually taking care of our soils. At the same time, we're making smart decisions so that we can eliminate a lot of the problems and solutions so we can have a stronger base. If we do not measure things, we cannot manage them. And this is sort of key. I would say that I started doing soil samples back in the mid-70s. We were grid sampling on my farm through the 80s. I've done a lot of mapping, but it becomes important that we have to measure things that we have to change. And so to manage them, we have to know what we're starting with. So a lot of times you look at soil samples and people say you take the parts per million by 2. Just want you to make sure that you understand that if you actually take 6 3/4 inches across an acre, that gives you 2 million pounds, and that's where that number comes from. So if you have a test 4 inches deep or a test that's 12 inches deep, it does vary and change that number. But the number that 2 is based on that measurement that we have. So we usually soil test that 6 inches. So just something to be mindful about. That's where that number 2 comes from when you multiply your parts per million by 2. Another comment that I always make when I'm working with people is understanding fertilizers. We actually understand what we have for seed and technology. We do a lot of work on chemistry and what is happening with our crop protections and our fungicides. But do we truly understand what the crop or the nutrients that we are putting on? What pHs there are? What's the difference between MAP and DAP? When should we apply each? You know, and it becomes key to different types of phosphorus and potassium as we go through. So we're going to actually spend some time talking about that today. Knowing that a plant is 96% carbon, hydrogen, oxygen is quite unique, knowing that we're actually spending time working with that 2.6 to 3% of the NPK with a smaller amount of secondaries and a very small amount of micronutrients. Yet we know the difference that small 1 liter, half a liter of a micronutrient can change. So understanding biostimulants. So why we're going to switch a little into biostimulants for just a second is just to understand that your soil is naturally full of all these creatures, and that biology in the soil is natural. And how do we stimulate that? Sometimes gets confused where it's just called a biostimulant when we're actually looking at how do we stimulate that. So biostimulants, they really are natural processes to enhance or benefit nutrient uptake, nutrient efficiencies, tolerance to abiotic stresses, leading to improved crops. Sometimes we wonder, what are they not? Well, we want to be careful we don't just call them NPK, but it's better to think of them as a beneficial substance or organism that can help the plant throughout the growing season. And it was interesting today, I just Cargill just sent out my monthly read, and it's all about biostimulants. It's a very good read on how biostimulants function and what we need to look for in them as well. Key thing that I always tell people is, you know, they are basically 100% organic. So there's nothing found in these products that is foreign to the plant or soil, because that's actually where they all had stemmed from and were created from. Breaking them into 5 areas, we have the humic and fulvic world, the protein hydrolysate amino acid side, we have chitin, we have biologicals, and we have plant extracts, hormones, and sugars. So you're just going to touch on those lightly, and then we're going to get into just looking how the K-Tech works with them. Humic and fulvic acids, they're mined from soil. Their mode of action, they increase organic matter, chelating nutrients, improve soil structure, and they're a food source for microbials. Great water source capacity too. Probably one of the best chelators that exist. The nano-sized particles can translocate many minor elements like iron and zinc and boron. As a binder, the NPK remains in low organic forms when it actually is bound with the humics. It allows the plant to be able to utilize it better. And I think the key thing is that we can actually use humics to buffer against sodium and toxic metals as well. And I think it's to know that, backing up to when you know that a plant actually is still 96% carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. When we actually attach carbons and have carbons working with them, the plant will take those nutrients in more efficiently and be able to utilize them. But when you're buying a product, I want you to make sure you're careful, because a lot of times we look just at a price for humics, or we look at volume, we have to put a lot on. I sort of look at, there are products that are like horsepower and there's products that are like torque. Obviously, you can tell that I would love to have one of these Mustangs someday. That's actually classified as a want, not a need in my home at this point. But the horsepower of that car is 760 horse. Definitely will not pull that disc ripper on my farm there. So you have to look at when you get a product, what is a humic product that would actually go on and work at a liter per acre versus something that work at a gallon. So again, it becomes very important and key how you pay attention to it. These are some products that we're going to be working on and doing some research with as well coming into 2021 is the NACHURS and Alpine Humiflex, which is our humic product. Again, it's on the label. It's 24% humic acid. And I think it's key because I've seen some products where people ask me, it'll say right on there, it's 12% potassium and there's no humic number on there. And it's important that you understand how much humic is actually in that. This is the fulvic as well. And our fulvic is a 3% fulvic acid. And again, that's products that we're going to bring up and be able to start doing some neat work with and at some really efficient rates within furrow and also working with nitrogen as well. The fulvic, we're looking at going between that 1/4 and 1/2 liter per acre in starters and foliars. And we also look at the humics where we can run that between 1/2 liter and 2 liters. That way we're not trying to displace 1 or 1.5 to 2 gallons of in a furrow band to displace phos. We can actually do it at rates that are very applicable to the equipment that we have. These are just some of the trials that have been done across different plants to look at the rates. And again, I always love that we're looking at about an 81% win factor. And we have to be cautious that when we're looking at all kinds of products, people say, well, it didn't work for me this year. You know, and it's like most of the biostimulant products, most nutrient products, everything will work around that 65 to 75 rate. And it's no different than your fungicides and your herbicides, because we've all had to respray as well. But something just to know that we need to apply them when they need to be applied. So again, we talk about the humic matter has been shown to increase nitrogen uptake in plants. It also really is key for helping enhance the uptake of potassium, calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus as well. And understanding that enhanced plant growth following additions of humic materials has sometimes been related to increased micronutrient availability, especially with zinc and iron as well. This is just another one that we actually keyed on of how the length, when you do have actually humic and fulvic acids, that you actually can benefit by having the nutrients stay available to the plant for a longer period of time. So that's really something neat that we're going to look forward to. Again, we look at how it is key on helping exudates. And that, again, as we talk through, we're going to be able to understand how the potassium acetate is also locks right into how we can actually feed microbials in the soil much more efficiently. As far as the biologicals go, they are isolated from the soil. The mode of actions, they basically are working through soils and plants. We have legumes. We use our inoculants for rhizobia to really support the nodulation process. And again, it's key to understand that the nodulation happens, but you have to have a really concentrated level of phosphorus, moly, boron that is really important to make sure that the nodulation takes place, and the communication between the plant is key as well. We do have them broken into 2 categories, which of course are your bacteria and your fungi. It's really neat when you take actually, take a gram of soil and you look at it and you think, well, we really don't know what's going on, but there could be a billion different bacteria in that, not to mention fungi, nematodes, protozoa, as we talked about. So it's really key to know that we are farming a really neat livestock, and it is key to how our nutrients work. This just to give you an idea of how the mycorrhizae work. That white is basically, it's a root. The gold across the top is a human hair, and the small blue is key to, because that's the hyphae that actually the mycorrhizae put out once they make the symbiotic relationship with plants. And that's key because when you look at soil structures, a root is not going to actually be able to get inside this clay particle and get to the organic matter, get to the nutrients and air and moisture that is. But that is really key of what the hyphae do. They can actually get through there. If you look at that airspace in there, it's interesting because as a hyphae goes in there, we always were wondering how in the world does it go in there without just curling up and getting lost? Well, actually, Sarah Wright in 1996 figured out that glomalin is actually what forms around the hyphae, and it keeps it that stiff so it can actually go through and carry on. What a lot of times when I'm talking to students, it's one of the things I refer back to is this was information found out in 1996. Well, it's not actually that long ago compared that mycorrhizae are probably close to 4 million or 400 million years old, whatever number you want to throw out. They've been around since plants came out. This just helps me understand that sometimes we learn things, we need to unlearn and relearn, and we need to continually expand our knowledge on what we know and what we're learning, so we don't get stuck back and say, well, this is the way we used to do it, because actually every day we create and we learn something new. Plant extracts, again, we looked at seaweeds, and a lot of those are really add really neat forms of nutrient. I've worked with some of those as well. And then you have your plant hormones, and you have to make sure that you have a good understanding of how plant hormones. That whole is a complete conversation unto itself. We can get into another 2-hour presentation one day that will just talk exclusively about the biostimulants as a whole. Again, sugars are important, and the reason I put this one is it's like adding energy to the Krebs cycle. But what you'll see as we go later on, the importance of sugars in plants, there's a lot of glucose that has to be created through photosynthesis. And one thing that we understand towards the end when we talk about the acetate of potassium acetate is actually mycorrhizae. They actually like the acetate more than they even like the sugar for being efficiency. So that's just something to remember later on as we go through. Protein hydrolysate, or the amino acid world. One thing I want you to remember that is actually they have mode of action in the plants. A pure form of nitrogen the plant has to assimilate nitrogen into, and then when you take the amino acids themselves, add to that with sulfur, the simple form, and you actually start to create your proteins. And that's all key, that you're going to need the sulfur and the amino acids to go through that process. The difference between plant and animal protein hydrolysates and amino acids are, it's like if you put animal amino acids on a plant, it's like putting a left-handed glove on your right hand. Everything is backwards, so you have to actually, the plant has to work that much harder to actually take energy to switch that to utilize it properly. So that's just something to be aware of when we talk about the amino acids, because we do know that whenever anything goes through a plant and is regenerated through a plant, through cover crops and green matter and put back down, the second time into the plant is way more natural as well. And we also know that plants are naturally conservative. The key of a plant is that it has to actually produce one seed so it can actually continue on its life. So when we look at how do we energize plants, how do we actually pick up the metabolism so that they'll actually create bigger yields, that's actually what we do in agriculture. We take that one monoculture, and how are we going to pick that up and utilize it to use what nutrients put down more effectively. So when you look at what happens is we have plants with great genetic potential, and what we end up working through is so every time we have a stress, we take yield away from that potential. So when you put it in the ground, it's stressed. When it actually takes its first drink, depending on the temperature, it's stressed. When it germinates, it's again stressed. When it actually sees sunlight, it's stressed, and so on. And how can we actually work to actually alleviate some of those stresses? And this is how it actually works out. If you look at this chart, at the end of the blue is where we have record yields, where people have achieved these yields before with these crops. Our average yields are the green. We're leaving 70% of the yield that we lose is to abiotic and biotic stresses. So how do we actually manage those stresses, and what do we use for nutrition and placement, and how do we actually help the plants work with the environmental stresses that are actually thrown at them all year long? So we're going to talk about K-Tech. That's actually the Alpines, our unique potassium acetate, which is a K24 is the product itself, a 0.024% potassium, and it's actually patented and trademarked by NACHURS ALPINE. So when you look at it, the potassium acetate-based fertilizer, it's a unique combination of inorganic salts and organic acids. It's basically improved plant uptake over other potassium source. It's non-corrosive for your equipment, and to verify that is this is the product that actually is created that we actually supply to airports to spray on runways to keep the ice off so you can safely land. So that's we're happy we don't create rust on airplanes, because I fly enough that I just as soon have a very clean airplane. Compatible with fertilizers and pesticides. It actually can be applied through irrigation and fertigation as well. So how it actually works directly within the plant is the acetate is incorporated into acetyl-CoA. And so this is going to be a couple minutes of actual science that probably you can shake your head and say, does it really matter to me? The key part for this part of the topic is if people can't tell you how or why something is working, it's just that use it because it's great. We have to understand science and what is happening within the plant, so we make sure that the applications are right and the timing is right as well. So when it enters into the plant, it produces basically fatty acids, steroids, and we'll go through a few things how it works in the plant. It also is a direct impact on cation balances in the cells. And as potassium is so important for standability through cells, it basically ultimately produces the malate. And malate is what really helps cell structure. It also is an oxidate that can bring and loosen phosphorus off aluminum as well in your soils. Understanding that potassium is so important for protein formation, enzymes to help other acids, the trigger pressure within cells, improves quality, and it improves root growth and resistance to disease and drought tolerance as well. A couple other things that we want to make sure we understand is how important it is to the exudates into the soil to help mine more nutrients, but we also want to pay attention to the nitrogen deficiencies that we have along the way with that. This is just the key understanding. Acetate comes in through the ATP cycle, and it turns into acetyl-CoA, and then it starts firing up the Krebs cycle as well. This is the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle, and it's called the citric acid cycle for that reason. You see the K-Tech comes in, and it actually is what really energizes and starts to work in the mitochondria, where this cycle actually every 2 times it creates your energy, the ATP, and it creates the sugars for your plant as well, and the energy that drives. Knowing that, I'm not sure how much each of you weigh, but we have to actually replace our weight in ATP every day just to function, whether we wink, blink, shake our hands, push a button. It all takes energy, and it's important that plants are the same. It's all about energy placement. So when you look at it, we actually have the potassium acetate is very absorbent. So here it just shows you basically after 48 hours how much of the acetate is absorbed into the plant compared to a lot of other forms of potassium as well. So the absorption is when we're using foliar, or even if it's coming through the root, how quickly it can actually be absorbed and utilized into the plants. The second thing is molecular size. And what we look at is from the molecular size is how easily can it actually be able to get in and out, polarity, move around the plant, and be utilized within the plant. And the same thing that we talked about a little earlier when we just mentioned the humic and fulvic, the humic acids are a very large molecular size, and they actually are very good in the soils going through the roots. They're not as effective for foliar, where the fulvics are really a smaller molecular size. So as we look at each product, it's important we understand what form it's in to make it usable for plants. The point of deliquescence is actually how quickly it actually dries or stays liquid on a plant. So because it only needs 23% relative humidity, if you use this as a foliar, the K-Tech will stay liquid more, so you can actually get into the plant. It doesn't dry on. And yet when it does dry on, it takes very little humidity turning around to be able to become mobile again, to move throughout your plants and be able to get into stomata and actually function very well within plants from cell to cell. We also look at the safety. This is what we talked about as far as the product safety goes. This is the salt index compared to other potassiums. And what we want to pay attention here is that when we're looking at salt index charts, that we just look at one chart and we don't compare charts to chart. A lot of times you may look at one chart and it may be based on UAN sprayed on lettuce, gave us, and that's going to be classified as 100% burn. And then another one may be a different form of nitrogen as 100% burn. But within one chart, you can actually see each product has been tested the same. The other one is when we look at the solubility that we talked about, that 100 grams or 255 grams of K-Tech can actually be dissolved by 100 mils of water. And to put this so you can get a picture in your mind, there's basically 75 mils or 2.5 fluid ounces of water on the little container to the left. And as you go across, that's how much potassium acetate will dissolve in that water. And if you look across to potassium chloride, it's that basically that 1.5 to 2 centimeters in the bottom of that container that would dissolve, and then potassium sulfate is even less as well. And so that just comes to say this is how soluble it is and how well it can move within the plants. So we're going to turn our attention a little bit now to the plant nutrients, how plants are stimulated, as well as how do we actually feed microbials. How does that nutrient actually work through the process? So the Alpine K-Tech, it's known biostimulant with positive effects on both plants, microbials, and fungal populations. It's a preferred food source. We talked about that over sucrose. So when you have actually sugar versus the acetate, the mycorrhizae would prefer the acetate, and I even respond more, and the bloom actually blooms more to having that in the soil as well. So when you actually work back into the Krebs cycle and the citric cycle, when you insert the acetate and similar to some amino acids, what happens is the plant is capable of taking those basically amino acids apart and turn them into succinates and glutamates, and you'll take 2 steps out of the Krebs cycle. So understanding in the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle, it has to cycle 2 times, 5 different steps. By taking out 2 of the steps to short circuit it, it allows the plant to create energy way more efficiently and provide more energy to the plant, which actually allows us to increase the exudates. I always use this story when I'm talking to grade 2 or 3 or 4 kids, how plants actually work. I say, well, actually plants have to eat. They bring things out of the soil through the roots, but then they poop, and they put their poop back down and out of the roots, and it goes into the soil. And then all the little microbes and little buddies down there, they actually eat plant poop. And what they do is they actually poop. And when they poop, the plant likes that, and they eat the microbials poop. So when you look at the process, it's a very simple things that kid can understand, that the exudates are hugely key, how we can get them. Roots don't feed themselves. You have to understand that roots need to be fed by the plant's top, sometimes taking up to 75% of the plant's energy to do that. So by creating energy quicker, by actually allowing the plant to have the basically provide the malates and the succinates and the energy and the food exudates to feed the microbials, it becomes that cycle that actually increases and increase plant health. So to look at that, the University of Texas, A&M, they actually did some work, and by looking at the amount of carbon that comes, carbon dioxide comes out of the soil, you can read how active the microbials are in the soil, and you can see that the K-Tech actually really helped there. Because I'm a simple farm person sometimes, I like to make sure I understand it. I actually did the same. I applied the K technology to some lima beans, and I actually pulled tissue samples, and we pulled soil samples, but we also did microbiology tests. And where I treated with the K-Tech, we actually had a 13% increase in microbial activity. We had 15% increase in bacteria, which gave us a 5.4% increase in active carbon. So I looked at that whole process. It was like, yeah, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. We saw that the plant exudates really encouraged microbial life, which means any nutrients that I've put out are now going to be utilized more efficiently as well. Understanding the role of potassium again, greater stalk strength, the regulation of stomata opening and closing in the mornings, translocation of nutrients. And what we find is that, interesting, when plants are actually given the ATP and the actually ability to increase their energy, if they're not trying to fix something, they will actually then use the time. If we don't have insect damage, we don't have disease, they'll use that energy to actually store more nutrients within the plant. And in every cell, it's unique because it has a vacuole in it. the vacuole is capable of becoming 75% of the size of that cell. And if we're moving nutrients, the plant will actually pack in potassium, so it has way more potassium stored inside. So during the next stress event, it's really key on how it has the ability to stay green longer and be able to use nutrient inside the plant if it has to shut down due to drought. I think we need to really pay attention to the increase of nutrient use efficiency too when we're actually working with potassium. This is just a picture of cell walls, and this is actually a wheat stalk. The important of when you can actually build the strength, then we build more nutrient within there, nutrition within the plant. We also open up the ability, you can see the size of the vacuoles and the xylems and the phloems to be able to move nutrients up and down the plant. And each one of those will actually increase the ability to move calcium and magnesium, some of the divalent cations as well. And it's all about plant health. We talked a little bit about water stress and how we can actually get through that. As you see down the side here, actually as the application of K goes up, you'll see that increase the water capability in the leaves to be able to help us through a lot of drought stresses. Nitrogen is key. A lot of times we are sold on the aspect that we can just grow everything with nitrogen and all the rest is in the soil. So when we look at the laws of the minimum, we're always saying, well, what is tripping us up here? You know, what is the lowest that we're working on? But one thing I want to key in is the law of the maximum. So you can see as the potassium goes up, the yields go up with the nitrogen, and therefore we're just utilizing our nitrogen more efficiently. And if we can put nitrogen together with boron and potassium, it's like any other nutrient. It's like when you put a starter together, when you can have NPK versus just N and P or straight P, they all synergize each other and the efficiency, it actually goes up a lot. So, you know, when you add a lot of N to your soils and you say, well, I think, you know, we're going to just pour N on because it's happening. High levels of N that really aren't being utilized by the plant tie up a lot of your micronutrients, and it becomes really key to adding to the nitrate issues in the soil. And if we have leaching out of our soils, because we have too much nitrogen, the plant wasn't capable of using it, then we end up getting nitrate losses into the water systems. But when nitrates leave the soil, a lot of times if you look at, they'll leave 20% nitrate. The other 80% will actually grab some hydrogen on the way through, and they leave as nitric acid. The interesting thing about nitric acid, when it leaves your soil and flows through, it actually strips calcium. And so all of a sudden we have land that we have high magnesium issues already, low calcium, we pound the nitrogen to it. It's the laws of the maximum. We need to really pay attention to how we balance our nutrients to make sure it's what the plant needs, you know, matching soil samples as well as what we apply with tissue samples as we go. These are just a few things we look at when you're looking at soil samples. If we have our potassium levels here, look really good. But if you look at the base saturation levels, they're below 2.5, and I like to see them actually closer to 4 to 7. But when you have the low base saturation numbers, even though we have high potassium, the plant, it's not available. And when we look at our K to mag ratios, and I did not correct that, it should be K to mag 0.25 to 0.35, we get plant health. And we drop below 0.2, plant health starts to dissipate because of the ratio between the magnesium. We also know that the magnesium is a key factor to helping us lose the ability for phosphorus to be used in the plant as well. Potassium has been declining. It just continues as we pull better yields off. We just continually use potassium up, and it's declined across all of North America. That we have to pay attention to what do we have available to us, not necessarily what's always sitting there, but what do we have available for the year. This was done by actually the Hefty brothers at Ag PhD. And what it shows here is as the base saturation on the left chart goes from 2 and it goes up to 3.5 to 4, and that kept going, that the yields actually follow it continually. The average yield is always going to be increased. What they did was they took a farm, they actually did 1 acre grids, they took the yields right over top of where they pulled the samples on both the boron and the potassium side here. They can see as we increase those numbers to healthier numbers, that yields were directly proportionate to those as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the product lines that we're going to be working with, and how Alpine's growing their product line to move from being just the starter fertilizer company that we are, that we understand our roots, but we're going to continue to grow and be able to expand and utilize what we do more efficiently. And that's a drink break. So we're looking at the products that are going to be going forward in the K-Tech line. At this point, we have the K24, which is the potassium acetate straight up. We have the F18 Max, which is going to be a foliar we'll talk about. We have the Alpine K19S as well. And we also have the K20S, which is underneath the line. At this point, we're working to actually have G22. We'll be working to have that into a potassium acetate shortly. In Western or in Eastern Canada, we have G240S, which already carries sulfur and the potassium acetate. So these are just some things that I'm working on to make sure that we can get into the hands of dealers and the hands of customers for timing and understanding what we're going to do when we're actually working through wheat programs and working through foliar programs and starters as well. Again, we have to understand how important it is for the K uptake, and we always a lot of times we get lost in the point that we have our potassium down early, it's all set. Once the plant gets growing, it's going to be key on nitrogen. But this is really interesting when you watch the uptake of potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen right into heading on wheat, how important it is to make sure we have those nutrients in place. So there's a key place for foliar applications. It's the same with canola. When you watch the numbers, how much you have to have your potassium above your nitrogen to be able to finish that plant off properly when we're doing pod fill. This was just a quick shot we did. We have some actually our G241 in furrow, but we actually added some K19S. We put the potassium in the furrow as well, and that was done through actually a furrow jet. But it was just really neat to see the increased mass that we do by actually spreading that across the fertility band as well. So starting with the F18 Max, it's actually the 846 with 1% zinc, 1% manganese, 0.1 boron, and then 0.05 copper. As we talked earlier about the humates and fulvic acid, we have a fulvic acid in here as the organic acid as well, which helps to get into the plant. It has the potassium acetate at 6%. What we've designed this product, and we've had it in the US for over 5 years now, is we're looking at a product to go on with your herbicide timing that didn't just have like a 15-3-6 with just a scatter of micronutrients, but we're understanding the need for zinc and manganese. So we took a product, we strengthened the levels of the micronutrients and adding in the biostimulants with the fulvic, as well as adding in the potassium acetate. We've been able to have some really neat results. So this was a trial that's basically been done at 72% win rate. This is done over the last 5 years. And I know we've had some good success on some crops in Western Canada here over the last couple of years now that it's been in use. The second one we look at is our K20S, which has the again, the potassium acetate technology in there. It has a sulfur at 8%. And for the upcoming year, we've actually changed the micro pack. It actually has boron, manganese, and we now have included molybdenum in there, moly in that. And that's something I was able to do research with over the past year. And we've been able to create that understanding of how that's important to help with the nodulation, to continue to support the nodulation through the growing season, as well as looking how do we actually get those nutrients released for pod fill as well. So the one trial I was doing, this is the same one that I pulled the microbiology test out of, where we were looking at the ability to increase our basically our livestock in the soil. We also were able to increase and build off the tissue samples. What is a key here to see is that we were able to support the deficiencies, but we really wanted to do was we wanted to move the divalent cations. And it's important when you look at a tissue sample that when it's perfect across the board, that we're in trouble, because a perfect tissue sample is telling us, like a fuel gauge, we're not using any. So I really like to draw down on the calcium and the magnesium, because magnesium is huge for chlorophyll. The calcium is so needed for setting pods, for putting the structure around each seed, having healthier, strengthening seed. And we've been able to look at some of these results and have like strawberries, 14-day longer shelf life, as well as quality that we get into our feed crops as well. These are just some of the results that we've seen when we're doing some work in Ontario with corn. These are some soybeans work that we did, and you'll see that we actually had a real nice boost from having the K20S and the F18 into the program, knowing that we have to keep those plants humming from basically setting flower stage. When they go into reproduction, the huge stress that's on a plant, how can we move nitrogen and help them out as well? The other one is the K19S, and this was actually some new work that we were doing here this past year, and it's 6% sulfur. We use this actually to blend with our nitrogen source, so it can go in sideband, it can actually go in drip, it can go with your streaming, as well as we use a lot of it with our side dress program here as well. In the trials we were doing, we added the K19S at 8 liters, which was 2 gallons per acre, blended with 32 gallons of UAN. But we also had a liter of boron with that as well, because I love how we can take boron and mass flow it into crops with the nitrogen source. It's probably the safest way to get it into the plant and becomes the most efficient. We don't, in this situation, when we added the 2 gallons in, we displaced some nitrogen because we knew we make nitrogen more efficient. So when you look at working it into your program, it's we don't always have to add that to it, but you can actually look at the efficiency. And again, we work on tissue and saps to make sure we're getting the right, the right nutrients in, and make sure that the nutrients are matching the removal as well on that. The success story here was that we ended up with a 5.6% yield increase. The moisture actually was a little bit lower where we actually had the K-Tech on, but it was the 11% feed value. And we go down the line, we really want you to look at that starch number, because starch is key for the feed value. But when you look at the ability to create protein, this is really neat to look how this would help support all our oil products, crops as well. G22, we're going to talk, this is our starter program. A lot of you have gone worked with that, safe, placeable source of phos as well. We have the HKW18, and both of these have not, they do not include the K-Tech at this time, but we will be working to have the K-Tech into the G22, hopefully coming into 2022. The importance of actually having that early germination, that early vigor. Onto the left, this was actually green beans that we planted, and we actually had 1 liter per acre just on the seed because they're so sensitive, and we're able to really boost the root mass out of the gate. And understanding, and this is done at a 32,000 population, but if we add 1 extra ounce of dry matter, basically through root matter to 32,000 seeds, it's 2,000 pounds of organic matter. So if you can add that same 1 ounce to a wheat crop, and we have 1.1 or 1.2 million seeds, it's incredible what we can do as far as for helping to increase a greater organic matter moving forward. Phos is always key. It's affected by pHs, moisture, and the form of PA and placement becomes very key in what we do. It's going to be soil, basically what phosphorus goes into the soil solution is what the plants are going to take up. And we know we have so many limiting factors. You can see we have the calcium, aluminum, and iron to grab it. pH levels are key to how we can get it into service, which really talks into how important it is to make sure we have the right type of phos in the right place to get it into the plant. Again, this chart just shows you actually once you get away from that above 7 and you start heading for 8, or you drop off, that we end up with a lot of issues with tie-ups. I always say that the form, when people say form doesn't matter, there's an awful lot of phos in a bone, a cattle bone. So if you take a cow bone and you actually were to lay up along a seed row and see how long it takes the phos, the plant to get the phos out of that form. So it's huge. When it's tied up, it's really tied up. Here's just a soil sample. It's when we're looking at a pH of the 6, it's important to understand that that helps to tie up already. You look at your iron and levels, and they're key. If you can increase your calcium level, calcium will release phos from iron and aluminum, but it has to be a rate that's not too heavy because, again, calcium will tie it up as well. On higher soils as well, we look back. It's neat when you look at your bicarb or your levels of phos on your soil samples. Come back and look at your saturation. The saturation P tells you what's really available in the plant. And as these numbers beside them, where you look at the aluminum numbers at 314, as those numbers increase, that phos level will actually drop. South of where I live here, we have actually levels of over 150 parts per million of phos in the soil. And that means we have a lot, except for the aluminum numbers can actually exceed 1800. And we have the same thing, the base saturation, or the saturation of P is very, very low. Temperatures, again, how important. We like to get planting as quickly as we can, and we know that the reduction of phosphorus from 21 down to 13 is 70%. So when it's really cool, we need that phosphorus to be very close, very safe, and available to the seed as well. But make sure you realize that actually zinc is the same. And you look, zinc actually goes from 375 to 50 parts per million uptake when it's cold, and potassium follows along the same way. Your potassium slows as well with your temperatures. The form of phos is important. Orthophosphate is what's taking up in the plant, and when we have 80% ortho available, and I think in the HKW18 it's 100% ortho, is very available to the plant to take in. We know that a seed actually has phosphorus in the seed coating itself, and that seed coating actually has to convert into ortho. So the sooner we can get ortho into that plant, so it can actually start using that energy and nutrients, it's a key to early vigor, early emergence, which just gives us a lot better plant health. You know, when your roots may touch anywhere between 3 to 5% of your soil, we understand that phosphorus just doesn't move very far. That it's going to take in, basically, if the phos is within about 1 millimeter of the root, that's about the most efficient that it's going to get. Further away, it really drops off. So getting the phos in a position where the roots can grow through it is going to be key to success in that early plant health. Again, like we talked, forms, tomato, water, ice. You know, two types of water solution here. That forms do matter in a lot of ways. And understanding analysis, this is each one of these analyses are all 624-6 products, and you can see that each one is different in its own way. And it's important that we have a high quality 624-6, or we look at the G22 when you do that. You want to make sure you have a high quality phos that's available for the plant going forward. So here's some numbers that were done on G22 versus 1034-0. 1034-0 has been around a long time. One of the key things we want to look at is that the G22 has NPK, not just N and P, which again helps the synergy of that. It also has, we also have a micro package in that really helps it support the yields as you go forward. And here's a 7.1% bushel. And the key is you look at the 0.4 dryer. It means we got that plant started a lot sooner. So sources do matter there as well. And this is just a similar graph of that, same results on that, where source does matter. You know, when you look at how we actually side band or we actually mid band and where we put our nutrients and how what our expectations are, it's really neat that when we actually can put our phos in a position where the plant can actually get started more efficiently. And not only does it help the plant get started to use that first 10 to 12 pounds of phos, but that early start helps you get into the side band sooner so that you can utilize the rest of your nitrogen and nutrient sources more efficiently by having that quick start in early season start. This is just where we look at, it's almost like what we call in some ways as a relay effect, where we're actually having the G22 plus the side band, and to know that the G22 helped that plant get that crop get going much quicker, but it helps the plant build the exudates, which will actually extrapolate and utilize and change the phos over more efficiently that you've placed in that side band. some more root development, and it's really key. It's hard to see sometimes. This shows the root mass. We'll be doing more root scans, which really are neat to be able to pull off numbers that prove what are the true fibrous small roots. And it's that new fibrous growth, that millimeter that you get in a new day, that actually will be able to draw the most of the nutrients out of the soil. We have to keep that new development going. Some foliar applications here as well, just seeing how nutrients can make a difference in a plant. When a plant gets the nutrients, the change up is so important and key. So we look at foliar nutrition. It's nice to know that when we're going across the field, and I had a meeting today with a company. It was the same thing. It's going like, what can we do? We're going across the field. How do we make sure that we're building a plan that actually is a crop plan for the season? So when we're going across the field, what does the crop need? How do we actually judge that and make sure we're putting on and using our equipment to the efficiency that it is? So here's just one where we actually have the Alpine F18 Max. It gave us a real neat kick on the corn. The K20S also gave us a nice yield advantage on foliar on corn. So if you're going across and you're putting down fungicides later on, how do we incorporate products that support them? And going forward with the potassium acetate is helping the plant move some of those fungicide through the plants more efficiently. Again, this is a soybean trial that was done with F18 Max at 1 liter. And the K20S as foliars as well. And it's sad that we've done a lot of work with the Eastern Crop Doctor for years, and he did pass away this past year. So I guess we'll be looking for a different research facility down that way. And again, we're going to be moving into a few different ideas when it comes to some larger plots, so we can work with growers as well. Potatoes, it's just nice to look at what happens when we add in potassium acetate. So that was 8 liters of the K24. Again, in the US, that's what they would call the 2 in a Q. It's basically 2 gallons in a quart. But here we're seeing some really neat opportunities for us to get the potassium acetate. We already have a massive amount of nutrients put in the potatoes, and how do we actually allow foliars and others to extrapolate them out? Canola that was done in in Saskatchewan as well. We've had a lot of neat work done out there. We're able to use again the K20S and the F18 Max going forward to into wheat trials. We had some work done at Olds, and we'll do some more work this year with them as well, looking at how do we create and get above that check and get that ROI built into the program as well. This was canola work, and I've done a bunch of myself over the past several years with canola, getting some in furrow for sure to help us get a real start, and then looking at how do we come back to make sure that we're getting the boron and the potassium and the energy move when we start to fill that pod on that. This was some F18 Max that was done with the UAN top dress. Again, we're going to be doing a bunch more work with streamers and actually the top dress nitrogen across wheat, across canola, and other trials this year. So now we're going to look into micronutrient packages and our chelated micros. And as you'll see, I have boron there is not chelated. We chelate metals. Boron doesn't fit into the metal category. And boron is never usually or is not chelated, but it's such an important part. So when we look at adding micronutrients into starter programs or into foliar programs, when we put our micronutrients into liquid forms, they are uniformly spread across the entire crop. So if you're putting them in furrow, we know that we're getting the same amount of zinc or manganese in position for each seed to get it. It's not going to be scattered. When we're doing it on foliar levels, again, we know that it's being spread evenly across the entire foliage area as well. Boron, to me, is something we have to pay big attention to. We're seeing results continually with having boron in place, so it helps with the meristem growth, carbohydrate metabolism. It's huge for pollen and germination on both ends. It helps with cell wall formation, and it really supports respiration. I think what we have to watch though is that boron is depressed by sulfur. So if we're going to put all our sulfur up front and have that done for 1 year and supply enough sulfur for 4 or 5 years out, we have to make sure that we understand that we are going to be putting boron in a very deficient manner. So we have to see what are we going to do to actually get that put onto the plant through foliars continually to make that happen. Boron also assists plants in retaining K, and retaining K becomes how we actually retain water retention and how it actually gets health. So it's a key part to be worked with your boron. It's basically absorbed by pH relatively. So we want to make sure that your pHs are in line, and if our pHs are getting high that we have to look at, we'll probably have to make sure we include a 1/4 liter of boron with more of our application so that it's there. This is always an interesting one, that boron has an affinity to clay. And it's influenced more by high CECs than any other one. So as our CECs in our soil climb, the boron availability disappears. So again, it becomes, how do we manage that? How do we put that into our cropping plan to make sure we're getting that placed when it needs to be? 2.5 ppm on your soil sample is key. And it's also neat to watch your comparison between your calcium boron ratio as well. Chloride is something that we're doing some work, and I'm learning a lot more about it from in Western Canada. On my home farm here, we'll broadcast 200 pounds of KCl, so we know that I'm already getting 200 pounds times 60 K plus my 42 chloride. We actually have a fair bit of chloride. But I'm looking at what are the levels that really matter, and we're looking at if it's between 0 and 24, we're in the low stage, and then as we move through here, we go from 25 to 19 to medium. All the literature I've read is because chloride actually is a micronutrient, can be a macronutrient, it replaces a lot of things, it substitutes in, and there's a relatively tight window between having not enough and having toxic levels and how it works. What we look at, the majority of time, chloride yield benefits come from plant health. And we know that if you actually want to just go and put straight KCl across your lawn in the spring, that you'll actually get a darker green, healthier lawn. And that's the chloride that's really responding to that as well. So we're going to keep doing some work. We have a couple of really neat chloride products that we're working with, and we're continuing fine tuning to make them help them fit into the program so that we can do that. At this point, I guess what I'm going to be working on is chloride as a foliar because we know that it's going to help with, again, plant health, and that's how we can push yield with that as well. So when we look at adding micronutrients into a lot of our trials, here's one with the G22, 4 gallons, plus we had 0.75 liters of boron. So again, that gave us a yield. So again, talking about the difference between the minimums, understanding what your plant needs, we thought, well, let's go with 2.8 liters of boron. And again, with the fears of the maximum, it actually got us 52.1. So the trick was that 0.75 was way more beneficial to the crop than the 2.8. And at the end of the day, we ended up with your ROI would be just hugely different that way. Here's some work that was done with some zinc on some lentils as well. We just looked at, we had, a 60% gain, 4.4% gain. So again, when you look at your tissue samples and actually read through and see what does the plant need, I'm a big proponent of actually having zinc in my starter. I believe that when we're actually, if we're fighting with FOS, we know that zinc will be in the same territory as that, to add that in and then look at what we need. Tissue samples are also important. When we look at tissue samples, the first one is usually a benchmark. It gives us a great idea. The second tissue sample is key to tell us how is the plant responding, what are we using, and how do we need to treat that plant to actually give it the nutrients to create its genetic potential as well. And this is just another a wheat trial that we have, which talks again, just putting your microvolt zinc. The other one we have some copper and boron in. And working through 8.5 bushel with the zinc and copper. So it becomes, when you're looking at what are the deficiencies and what do you need in play, again, it's important that we look at and manage the crops through information, not through guesswork. This goes back to that trial where we said we actually had the 0.75 or the 2.8, and we just increased yield. I mean, the boron caused grief on the right side, having too much on. So again, it's the management of what we need. This shows the roots of the same trial, the effect that we had on that as well. So foliar feeding is something that we need to pay attention to. I know that we actually do have a lot of foliar feeding with G22 that we use during herbicide timing for safety, and it helps overcome some more of the inefficiencies. I know that some places where we got froze up faster in the Northwest, there was some 1034 that didn't get put into place, some other phosphorus that didn't get put into place, and we may be looking at how can we actually get a good FOS in the starter program, but we may have to come back with some foliar and see how can we actually support that through the season and the early season as well. It actually helps when we're looking at how do we actually put foliars down when we're trying to deal with herbicide damage and hail damage. Again, it's key to helping that plant overcome its stresses. And we looked at the very beginning, it's all about stress mediation. How can we actually make sure that we're helping the plant do what it wants to do, giving it the energy to do what it wants to do, and not necessarily telling a plant what to do, just creating the inner energy for it to actually make its decisions. Plants are pretty smart at fixing themselves up. So when we look at foliars as well, you know, when you have a plant that is deficient, we already are behind the 8 ball. We already know that. And you wonder, how can 1 liter of an application of a nutrient at even a 8% or a 0.1%, how does that affect the plant? But what I believe in foliar applications are that when you actually have a deficiency and you spray on foliars, the foliars actually then go into that leaf, and the leaf goes, cool, I'm sufficient. I now can exudate and push energy into my roots. The roots, the exudates that go down, and the root growth that you have, it's that fibrous new root growth, plus their exudates, releases more nutrients from the soil, and then it helps overcome the deficiency. Plants can call for what they want. If they're deficient in manganese, they're going to send down exudates to give them manganese. If they're deficient in magnesium, they're going to do the same. We need to create that opportunity and energy so they can actually overcome that. And that's key to understanding how foliars work. So that 1 liter doesn't act like 25 pounds, but it can actually help release that from the soil when we get exudates and stimulate plants and the microbial colonies that we have in our soils. Just to give you an idea, over the last while, over the last 4 years when I've been working with the K-Tech products, that we've been on canola, we've been across Western Canada. I do green beans and white beans. I do eggplant. I've been on some grapes and almonds, and we do peppers and asparagus. By the way, the almonds are on the U.S. side. Strawberries, but we have a lot of neat plants that we've seen some really great successes on. So as we sort of wrap up, I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the experimental technology and things we're looking at going into 2021 that we're going to be able to work with, as well as looking at how we can carry them on into 2022 and beyond. So we've been doing some work with what we call our GT products, and that's our amino acids been incorporated into some of our products. One we're going to have is going to be called a microbolt corn for Eastern Canada, microbolt cereal. That is going to be a micro package that also has the amino acids in it. The second one is going to be a microbolt pulse and soybean GT, again in the same way. The third one is we're going to use K20S, and we're going to actually turn K20S into a stronger product by adding the molybdenum in it and working with amino acids of working towards how we can actually create the energy. The potassium acetate already drives that. The amino acids actually work very similar within the GABA strand within the plant that helps create that energy so plants can do what they want. We also know that across Western Canada, we've been doing some work with molybdenum and cobalt. So this is just a little picture of what we're coming up with. But we have a lot of drills out there that have dosatrons that we're using for inoculant. How can we actually take advantage of those, especially in canola, to get some moly and some cobalt into place at the same time interjecting that? So again, these are just some really neat things we're working on. The DSMs have been doing a great job at actually coming up with ideas and concepts, and growers alike continue to drive us and give us the ideas that we need to be more successful going forward. So again, like I said, the microbolt pulse is a 106 with 3% manganese, 1.5 zinc. It has some iron and some molybdenum in it. And the neat thing about the amino acid is it's actually acts as a seed treatment. So instead of treating your seed, we'll actually have that same form of energy within the starter. So it can go on at 1 liter to 1.5 liters per acre with your starter program. And it helps improve the speed of which your plant will take in nitrogen or nutrients, how quickly it can actually turn the seed coat into more usable nutrition, and it helps drive and move those divalent cations more efficiently, which is going to be key to plant vigor and energy getting out of the ground. The microbolt cereal is a 2024% zinc, 1% manganese with some copper and some sulfur in that as well. And again, we like the copper form because that's really keys into helping with plant health. And if we can get that plant health started out of the gate, it'll carry a healthier plant right through till the flag leaf, kick that flag leaf out, and then get that production right into the head itself. With some of the work we've done with the microbolt cereal was I used it this year, and we've done some tissue samples. So if you see the top 2 lines where you go over to the boron, where I've got it, the 5.33 and a 6.27 did not have the microbolt cereal or microbolt corn in it. The 2 below did, and they were actually basically they were 15 feet apart in the field. That we were able to extrapolate more zinc, hold our manganese, and actually increase our boron across. The nice thing is knowing that we were extrapolating that boron out of the soil, because the boron, there is no boron in microbolt cereal. So this was really key to me saying we are driving that seed. We looked at roots. We're able to exudate and get those plants more active to be able to get nutrients out of the soil more efficiently. And again, that becomes more key to here's our nutrient package. Here's our fertilizer that we're building the relationship, not just from the plant, but the plant to the soil as well. When we put the microbolt cereal GT, which was put on the winter wheat last fall, this is the 2nd year that I've done this. This year we ended up with a 4 bushel advantage by having the microbolt cereal in with the starter in the fall. And again, it just creates a better crop. I also use F18 Max over the top of this field when we're actually putting our herbicide on to support the copper as far as nutrient and just driving that energy level more within that field. We did some work with K20S. I guess the best story was this grower, we put 100 acres on. We have some field view imagery where you can see the difference. I provided him with 100 acres worth on, these are white kidneys. We did red kidneys and some soys. And within 3 days, looking at that compared to competitive products, he actually he ended up purchasing another 2,000 liters. He sprayed 1,000 acres of his crop just because what he had seen the success of having the potassium acetate, plus working with amino acids to drive the health plants as well. Lima bean trial, again, we did some interesting things here. That is the same trial that I pulled the microbial tests out of, so that I had the where we saw the increase in microbial activity in carbon. Again, it's important to look at how we have been able to mobilize the divalent cations. And again, that's huge for when you need calcium, is what actually makes your structure. And if you're a seed grower, what's really interesting is that this is the part that the seed you're going to keep, you really want to treat it in a nice fashion, because we're seeing where we get responses in the following year having such a higher quality seed to go into market, and that just increases vigor, and it's like a synergy thing that just keeps snowballing and exponentially making for better successes. So we have a real quality team of DSMs, professional guys out there. They initiate the Alpine application kits. And I think it's really neat that we look at some of the fertilizer kits that they put on. And I know that when Alpine first arrived in Western Canada, they came out with a group of gentlemen that actually they just were supporting by putting kits on drills, making sure we moved forward. It actually opened up the whole area for having, basically putting quality FOS on seed, getting the responses that we did. And so we are blessed to have the team that we have out there. So in order to achieve yields, levels we've never reached before, we have to do something different than we've ever done before as well. And that's Francis Childs, and he actually creates some pretty neat yields. But as we continue this upward production trend, we must become more targeted on our approach. We need to become more precise on what we do. Always looking for new ideas and technologies to boost our crop production. So again, it's like, what can we do better? What can we do strong? How can we put a plan together, and what does that plan look like? And what do we include in that to have greater success? So that was really a lot for you to consume in a short period of time. I really appreciate your time, and I know it's difficult for questions, but if you got some questions you want, I'm going to exit out of here, and then we can ask a few questions. But more importantly, if you need to contact your DSMs and you would like to have a conversation with myself, and we can look at tissues and soil samples going